Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. It's been almost 14 years since the Australian Bureau of Meteorology and the Sydney Morning Herald announced the Australian permanent drought, January 4th, 2008. It may be time to stop describing southeastern Australia as gripped by drought and instead accept the extreme dry as permanent, one of the nation's most senior weather experts warned yesterday. Perhaps we should call it our new climate, said the Bureau of Meteorology's head of climate analysis, David Jones. And a few months later, the Age newspaper said, experts warn of never-ending drought. They warned that the drought was just going to become worse the following year. But instead of drought, it rained so much in Australia that the water accumulating on the surface actually caused global sea level to drop. A lot of water evaporated from the ocean and ended up being standing water in Australia. But undaunted by their previous failures of prophecy, the press and academics went right back to making the same mistake the next time Australia got dry. They said that the drought and fires during 2020 in Australia were caused by climate change. But by March of this year, Southeast Australia was flooded once again. And now, in December, the floods are still occurring. Instead of just admitting that they don't know what they're talking about, climate experts have taken a very predictable route of blaming both droughts and floods on climate change. After his catastrophically bad climate predictions from previous years, Michael Mann said, "It's not too late for Australia to forestall a dystopian future that alternates between Mad Max and Waterworld." Climate experts predicted permanent drought, but when that didn't happen, they simply blamed both wet periods and dry periods on climate change. If Michael Mann actually knew anything about the climate of Australia, he would have known that the climate has always alternated between drought and flood. That is their normal climate. Here's an article from the Empire in Sydney dated October 13, 1868. It enumerated the alternating droughts and floods which had occurred in Australia since Captain Cook first visited there. Australia's poet Dorothy McKellar wrote this poem in 1908. My beautiful wife Kyrie from Japan, who used to be a poet, is going to read the poem to you now.
I love a sunburned country, a land of sweeping plains, of rugged mountain ranges, of droughts and flooding rains. I love her far horizons. I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror. The wide, brown land home me. Dorothy McKellar, My Country, 1908.
Thank you for that beautiful poetry reading, Kyrie. It's unfortunate that Michael Mann and his other expert friends are neither poets nor historians. If they knew anything about science or history, then they wouldn't make such ridiculous claims. Let's look at some specific examples of bad weather in Australia's past. In January of 1974, Brisbane had massive flooding after getting 32 inches of rain. And that same year, 15% of Australia burned. The floods and fires in 1974 were awful, and then came Christmas Day at Darwin. Cyclone Tracy destroyed 90% of the buildings in Darwin, and the city had to be evacuated for an entire year. 1974 brought horrific weather all over the world, and climate experts blamed the bad weather on global cooling. The droughts, floods, fires, cyclones, and tornadoes of 1974 were blamed on a new ice age which was coming in fast. Now let's go back to Black Friday 1939, when most of the forest land in Victoria burned up in just a few hours. The fires were so bad that when they were over, there were only 600 koalas left in the entire state of Victoria. The fires burned up lots of people as well, and during January 1939, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Canberra all set their all-time high temperature records. There was lots of extreme weather all over the world during 1939. And just like now, people who lacked historical knowledge blamed the bad weather on climate change. The Des Moines Register reported, "The myth of climate change arises over and over again." Another extreme weather year in Australia was 1851. On February 6, 1851, which was known as Black Thursday, Most of the state of Victoria burned up in just a few hours. It was 117 degrees in the shade at Melbourne at 8 o'clock in the morning that day. Hot winds, almost the strength of a hurricane, fanned the flames throughout the day. Bushfires raged across hundreds of miles of country, sweeping along with almost the rapidity of lightning and destroying nearly instantaneously men, women, and children, crops and homesteads, fences and gardens, and vast quantities of cattle, sheep, horses, pigs, and fowls. Michael Mann hopes to return Australia to their safe and stable climate of 170 years ago. And just like the Aborigines in 1846, Michael Mann blamed climate change in Australia on white men. Blaming white men is always a convenient excuse when you don't have any idea what you're talking about. 150 years ago was a horrifically bad year in the United States. The deadliest fires in U.S. history burned Chicago to the ground and also burned up thousands of people in Wisconsin and Michigan. Michael Mann may like that kind of climate, but most people don't. That same year, the Brisbane Courier ran one of my favorite articles about climate change. Imaginary changes of climate. A plentiful crop of speculation from weather prophets and projectors and half-instructed meteorologists and all the philosophic tribe of Laputa in general, to whom the periodical press now affords such fatal facilities. Every season is sure to be extraordinary, almost every month one of the driest or wettest or windiest, coldest or hottest ever known. Much observation which ought to correct a tendency to exaggerate seems in some minds to have rather a tendency to increase it. And here we are 150 years later repeating the same climate clown show over and over again. Toto wonders sometimes why humans are so clueless and why they're so difficult to train. But he's a very patient dog, and you can visit him, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.